Welcome to One for the Road. I'm Devvy Kid and your commentator. One for the Road was developed and created to help the busy commuter and Americans who don't have access to the internet find out what Congress and the media won't tell you. The national ID is of paramount concern to those of us who refuse to be tagged and numbered like animals. Many do not want to comply but don't know what to do as an individual. First, this national identification is voluntary, not mandatory for the individual. However, the sinister and devious minions behind the scenes who write this legislation for our corrupt Congress added some provisions they hope will force Americans to surrender. For example, you won't be able to fly on commercial airplanes, ride on Amtrak, or enter a federal building. You see, these areas are under the control of the federal fist, and they are counting on enough Americans who don't know what this new law says will simply comply in order to hop on a plane or train to go see grandma or for a business requirement. Let me quote Congressman Ron Paul, who is running for president. Supporters claim it is not a national ID because it is voluntary. However, any state that opts out will automatically make non-persons out of its citizens. The citizens of that state will be unable to have any dealings with the federal government because their ID will not be accepted. They will not be able to fly or take a train. In essence, in the eyes of the federal government, they will cease to exist. It is absurd to call this voluntary, unquote. What about the states? Many have already expressed concerns that they simply don't have the money to implement this insidious and phony tool to fight the never-ending war on terrorism. The National Governors Association, National Conference of State Legislatures, and the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators indicated in a recent report that the costs of reissuing driver's licenses to conform to this national identification within the recommended time, the on-site verification procedures, and other requirements will run the states approximately $1 billion on the front end and roughly $10.1 billion over the next 5 years. Anyone who isn't walking around in a self-imposed coma understands that these draconian laws coming out of Congress usually end up costing 10 times what they estimate. This is why the legislation was crafted the way it was, with the provisions that will forbid any citizen from being able to exercise their right to fly on commercial airplanes, Amtrak, and enter federal buildings. This is the iron fist of totalitarian government. If the states opt out, their citizens become non-citizens. This is beyond an outrage and only a massive outrage by the American people will cause such a firestorm. We will see one state after another not only opt out, but sue the federal government to stop them from taking away your rights as a citizen of that state. Congressman Ron Paul had warned that same day in his speech, quote, "Those who are willing to allow the government to establish a Soviet-style internal passport system because they think it will make us safer are terribly mistaken. Subjecting every citizen to surveillance and screening points actually will make us less safe, not in the least, because it will divert resources away from tracking and apprehending terrorists and deploy them against innocent Americans. Every conservative who believes in constitutional restraints on government should reject the authoritarian national ID card and the nonsensical intelligence bill itself," unquote. This national ID will do nothing to fight the war on terrorism. It is already a disaster in progress because the technology to be used isn't ready, and the bogus Department of Homeland Security has proven to be yet another government nightmare. You do not have to accept this driver's license. You can refuse. The states can and must refuse to comply, but they will not unless there's enough heat to melt the entire Yukon. The state houses must hear from you now, not next week or next month. Action is the order of the day. Taking a stand is the order of the day. No more talking about it. More than a dozen states have already said no to this draconian Soviet-style tool to control you and create dangerous databases. If your state legislature has not passed legislation yet to outright reject this unconstitutional federal plan to further strip the states of their right to issue and control driver's licenses, get on the phone and demand that they pass the same legislation the state of Maine did several months ago. Both the House and Senate approved a resolution declaring that the state of Maine flat out refuses to force its citizens to use driver's licenses that comply with the digital ID standards which were established under the 2005 Real ID Act. Call your member of Congress and tell them to reverse the so-called Real ID Act. Tell your congressperson that you will refuse this national ID because Congress has no authority under Article 1, Section 8 to pass this kind of junk law. It exceeds their legislative authority. Back in 1770, Thomas Jefferson said, "The law of nature, all men are born free. Everyone comes into this world with a right to his own person, which includes the liberty of moving and using it at his own will." The federal courts have always upheld that we the people have the right to travel and move about freely. This so-called national ID driver's license will invade your privacy and deny you the right to travel freely. Get on the phone today and make your voice heard at the state and federal level. We the people have had tremendous success with more than a dozen states rejecting this national ID, but the feds won't give it up because it's a tool desperately needed by the globalist Bush administration for the proposed North American Union and the merging of the United States with Canada and Mexico. All of these are interlocking pieces, and all Americans must wake up to these painful facts.